You ready to do this? Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
I think it's time, right?
Are you ready for some Office 365?
And Xamarin app.
Cool. Well, we got one clicker to share, so that's very exciting.
Yep.
Now, we didn't have any option to put this slide in. I'm sure you've seen this slide everywhere. Ooh, ah. So make sure you fill out your session. We would love to come back and speak more next year. But really, this session's all about how to integrate Office 365 APIs into cross-platform mobile applications across Xamarin iOS, Android, and of course, Windows. I'm going to focus quite a bit on iOS and Android, which you're going to take a look at how we extend that code and shared code over to Windows as well. And there's other sessions that Shaks here is giving on Windows 10 as well later in the day. So this is kind of the outline, the agenda that we'll kind of walk through, kind of how to get up and started. What is Xamarin to begin with? How to get up and started? How do we authenticate? And how we actually access the Office 360 APIs to create great Office-connected applications. So first, of course, you may be wondering, who's this guy? Well, that's me. I'm James Montemagno. I live there in Seattle, Washington. It's lovely. Rest assured that our best coffee is not being served here. There's plenty of fantastic coffee in Seattle. If you come find me, just ping me. I'll take you to the most amazing places in Seattle. I live right downtown. That's all I really do besides making mobile apps. I've been a mobile app developer for nearly 4 years now. I love everything about it, and I love sharing my knowledge with everyone here, especially on my GitHub. Everything I do is open source.
So I'm Chakradeep. Friends know me as Chucks. That's much easier to spell than my full name. So I work as a program manager in the SharePoint team. So previously I was part of the Visual Studio Office developer tools, so building all the tools you see in Visual Studio to build Office applications and SharePoint applications. I just moved to SharePoint team, but still the Office 365 is where I live and breathe every day. Yeah, you can reach me at Twitter, that's my email, or you can go to my blog, chakradeep.com, to get awesome posts about APIs.
Nice short URL.
Short URL, that's actually short.
That's not bad. When I tell people Montemagno, we run into the same exact situation. Like, I don't know how to spell that. I'm going to take 15 characters on that.
Yeah, but Montemagno sounds like an Age of Ultron character, though.
So it's really interesting. When I got started with Office 365, I worked a lot with Shaks, all the time, back and forth. And I live in downtown Seattle. Microsoft's out at Redmond. So I'd have to go back and forth all the time. And one thing that we really struggled with was you'd call me over, we'd be on Hangouts or on Skype and say, hey, we need to schedule a meeting. Like, hey, can you come over to the office so we can go over slides or prepare? But we found there's all these different applications trying to integrate with your calendar life to optimize it, but everything was difficult. There's a lot of fields to fill out. You have to find the contact, enter the times, enter the date, enter the location.
Well, the thing is, we also knew why we were meeting and where we were meeting, because it was something that we all know. He comes to my office, we go to cafe, or it's just like very agile and Scrum in nature. But when we started to build these meetings, like every time there is this, oh, he uses an Android phone, or I have an iPhone, and there's a Windows phone, there's tablets and everything. So we thought, okay, so how do we actually build something that's cross-platform that can integrate with my team here, as in my team, me and James and I, and actually, we want something really quick. I just want to send like a SMS, hey, come and meet me, but it has to be something that and can be a calendar in the calendar event, so James can say, yep, I'm coming to you, or I can decline and do something else. So what we did was we went ahead and discussed this, okay, what can we do, James? We need to have an awesome demo for build, and we also need to prepare some good slides. So we decided to build an app, but we also wanted to do it in 2 days, right? Because if you take a month, then, build this in a month.
Yeah.
So what did we do, James?
Well, so what we decided to do is we ensure that we're cross-platform. I'm an Android user. You're an iOS user now. Yep. But we wanted to ensure that anything we were doing was cross-platform. Again, it was easy, simple clicks. So the idea that we came up with was creating a simple application that we call 5-minute meeting. The entire concept is within just a few button clicks. I pick someone from my contact list, schedule a meeting, and it instantly shows up on our calendar. No fields to fill out. Just pick a date, pick a time, pick how long you want the meeting to be with. And this is where the entire concept, this is where all of this session is going to focus around, is how we built this application to integrate with Office 365 APIs for contacts, calendar, and even mail right into iOS and Android applications.
So how did we build this? I mean, it took us, what, 2 days.
About 2 days or so to get this up and running. You see, we put a little bit of design in it.
Yeah.
We can put some big, nice labels, 5 minute, 10 minute, not bad.
And again, we both know .NET a lot. We work in Visual Studio, so we were like looking for something that is cross-platform. And James happened to be the Xamarin guy, working for Xamarin, building these awesome apps. So I asked James, hey, you said Xamarin is very powerful, so can we do it in 2 days? He was like, hell yeah. So,
so let's do it. So how many of you are familiar with Xamarin already?
Quite a few. Yep.
So there's some new people to Xamarin. So I'll give you a quick overview of just what is Xamarin, how does it work in a nutshell, and then we'll kind of dive into the Office 365 APIs. So when we thought about architecting this application, we're native people. We love our native applications. And we wanted to ensure that when we're architecting this application, we could share code and take it to new platforms, but create great experiences on all platforms. So we wanted to ensure that our applications that we were using on a day-to-day basis had 3 specific things. First and foremost, a beautiful native user interface, so we could take advantage of the specific UI elements, material design, or the iOS 8 design metaphors, and then obviously window design metaphors as well. And then we wanted to make sure that we could integrate with all the different native APIs on each platform. So if we wanted to add in the future Bluetooth support, iBeacon support, so when I enter a room, it automatically checks me in, we would have that ability.
And watch support.
And of course, watch support. We talk about native user interfaces. It's not just actually the phones and tablets anymore. It's all these emerging devices. Integrate with Band, for instance, and shared code. And then, of course, we wanted native performance. We wanted it to be quick. You need to get in and out and schedule those meetings, or else I would just open another application. So when I started with Xamarin 4 years ago, actually as a customer and creating applications, this is where I felt. And this is how I fell in love with Xamarin in general. It's delivered on all of these. And how Xamarin works is we enable you to build a shared C# backend. This is all your .NET code. So all of your business logic, your models, view models, SQLite databases, RESTful service calls, and then any of the other APIs and .NET libraries, such as the Office 365, JSON.NET, OData, anything. It's shoved right into that shared C# backend. It's the platform-independent code that's shared, which is often 50, 60, 70% or more of your code. But then we give you the tools right in Visual Studio, which we'll see here, to build out a great, beautiful native interface for iOS, Android, and Windows as well. We also have another library called Xamarin Forms to actually do a cross-platform UI layer as well. But 100% native, 100% API access to craft all of this as well. And how that works under the hood is if you're a Windows developer, well, you know all of your .NET namespaces, everything that we know and love about .NET. If you're going to Windows, whether it's phone, tablet, WPF, wherever you're going to go, the back end, you get new SDKs, and you just start tying in that back-end code. When you go to a new platform, same thing, new SDK, tie in this platform-specific features. You can think of the same thing now when you want to go to iOS or Android. What we did is we created C# bindings for every single API in iOS. And we give you the .NET namespaces as well, because we run the mono runtime for iOS or Android. So you get all your .NET goodness shared across iOS and Android and Windows, but all of the iOS-specific APIs. So if you want to take advantage of one of those features, you can. We didn't stop there. It's not just a wrapper around it. We added C# features. So async await, lambdas, link support, delegates, events, everything that we know as C# .NET developers, that how we want to write code. It's all there, whether you're interacting with iOS or just your pure .NET. And of course, the same thing is true over here on Android. Everything's shared across the board. And what's great about this approach is that you're able to share code in multiple ways. You're probably familiar with portable class libraries. It enables you to create one shared library of code across all of your applications. You can do that right there. When you install Xamarin, you get Xamarin iOS and Android. You also have shared projects, which were introduced in VS 2013 and obviously 2015 as well. That's what we're going to be using here today. But you bundle all that goodness up with the power of NuGet to pull down and share and create all of your favorite libraries, because they're all just .NET libraries. .NET code runs now on iOS, Android, and you pull all this together. And this application specifically that we're showing here, 70% of the code was shared across iOS and Android.
And that's in 2 days.
In 2 days. Yeah, so I try to follow best practice. We'll take a look at it as well. A lot of MVVM goodness going on. So there's that. But that's Xamarin in a nutshell, but we're also here to how do we integrate Office 365. So, Chaks, you're the expert on Office 365. It's kind of
That's something happened.
Uh-oh, one more.
There you go. Yep. So Office 365 is all about the users and collaboration and the data that happens to collaborate within the users and groups, right? So for example, me and James and I here, we wanted to collaborate on the events and the messages and things like that was going on. So luckily I had an Office 365 account and I added James to it, although I could have used just his Gmail and other accounts. So what happened was, well, now it's all about how do I get the power of Office 365, the data, the service, and build it into an application so I can actually get the data out or send data to Office. There's also the other part, which is you see on the left side, which is interacting with the Office and extending Office to provide that interface, right? So you can build add-ins to your Outlook.com, or how you saw in the keynote, you can build an add-in, publish it, and make it available in the web browser, in your iPad, coming soon to Android, as well as to your modern Windows apps for Office clients, and 32-bit, of course. So how did we do this? Well, Office 365 provides a rich set of API, REST APIs, open standard format APIs that for different workloads. So if you want to go access users' files, you get to access users' files, the calendar, inbox, as well as your whole GAL, global access list, right, in your Azure AD. And also, we announced the preview for the Groups API today. So if you have group, especially with projects, you can create a group and then you can have resources specific to the group, like files for that group, calendar for that group, and we have API to go and manipulate that data too. And it's part of the bigger picture, which is the Azure AD, right? So Azure AD is what powers the user management and the application management in Office 365. So this whole API feature-rich set is part of that Azure AD. Well, what that means, it gives you a single authentication flow. So how many of you have used cloud services, Facebook, Twitter, application, right? So every time somebody wants to say, hey, connect your Facebook account, what happens there is that application is going to ask you saying, hey, this application that you're using is trying to access your Facebook info. Do you want to let it access, right? So that's kind of the nature of the OAuth flow that we call it, where you have to consent the user to request access to specific resources. And that's exactly what model we have in Azure AD. And there's only one single authentication flow, the OAuth flow, and that will help you to build applications that request access to specific resources. So in this case, we could say my application wants access to calendar. So I can then go and either read calendar items and also have the ability to write into the calendar items. And this is industry standard, right? There may be some little different to how Facebook does this, a little different to how Twitter does this, but the underlying protocol is exactly the same. So let's see it in action. We have talked a lot, so let's show them something.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look. Let's switch over here. And I wanted to get up and running, kind of show you a little bit how we got up and running. Switches, there we go, perfect.
Yep.
So this is Visual Studio. I'll tell you about my setup here. I'm on a Mac. As you can see, it kind of, you don't really know. Got my bar down here. I'm inside of VMware with Unity mode enabled, so it's kind of blending the two worlds of Windows and OS X together. I'm a Windows guy, so this is kind of a nice experience for me. Now, let's just look at the app, though. I actually have it running down on my iOS simulator and my Android, Xamarin Android player. This is our high-speed Xamarin Android player. Works with any Android emulator, so if you're using the Hyper-V emulator that Microsoft ships, that works as well. So let me just go ahead and pull up 5-minute meeting here. And this is our Lollipop emulator, which is very pretty. So this is going to go out. It's going to authenticate with Azure AD, and it's going to pull back my contacts. We'll do the same over here on.
So this is actually pulling the contacts from Exchange, right? Exchange. So if you go to Outlook, you have the Contacts tab, and you can create contacts, your local contacts, not your peers, right? Yep. So this is exactly pulling that.
So we have a nice little card design here. As we can see, everything's all very material design. Little floating action bar. I can page over, see all my upcoming meetings that I have here. I scheduled it here, so we have a way of creating our own calendar events. Maybe I just need to create one for myself, or maybe I need to schedule one with someone. So I can come in and say, I need this to be a 15-minute meeting. It's going to be for right now. Well, it's time's off, we'll create an event. Why not? There we go. It creates the event in my calendar, nice and quick. If I go into my team member specifically, I could create a new team member. Or here, for instance, I could click on Shocks. And let's go ahead. We could write notes. I could give them a phone call, send them an email, or click on the calendar button. We'll get the same preview here. Maybe I need to meet you maybe in Redmond next week.
Sure.
Let's do that. Create the event. And that'll go ahead and create the event now linked to Shocks there. And we can do the same thing over here on iOS. What's really great is I have all my contacts directly on iOS and Android. I can look at my calendar view.
I just got the meeting.
You got it already?
Yeah.
There we go.
And I can actually accept.
Look at this live demo. So let's actually switch over now to Office 365. And now we can see actually all my new calendar events coming up. Let's refresh this page. We should have hopefully something here. There we go for our different meetings that we scheduled. And there's you right in there, live. If I come back over into my mail, I should hopefully get a brand new update. It'll hopefully email me that you accepted it if you did accept it. So it's automatically going back and forth right there. Now if I pull back up the emulators, we can dive in and we can see this actually hopefully happening in near real time. You know, I really like meeting with Shocks. I mean, I could delete him, but let's just schedule another meeting with him. We'll see what it looks like on iOS. What's important here is that we have a specific user interface for iOS and Android with the exact same paradigms that users are used to. So when I come here, let's do a 30-minute meeting. We'll just spin, whatever, that looks good. I'm always meeting with you. We'll add that calendar event, and we're done. There we go. Already got a notification over here as a reminder. So it's just really that simple.
And here it is.
Look at that.
Yep. By the way, I do get the meeting.
Yeah, it's a real thing that's happening. But what's really nice here is that what we can see is we have the nice paradigms on each. We can go in. I can also create a brand new contact and add that as well. So we added a little bit more than just the calendars. If I want to add new contacts, manage my contacts in here as well, or place a phone call, or even send an email. So I could say, hey, I want to send you an email. There's an upcoming meeting. Now I'm actually tying in to the Exchange part of it to send Shocks an email right here. But let's actually show you how I design and create this application.
There's email.
Real live demos. It's
Yep.
all happening. Cool. So let's jump over to Visual Studio again. Now, some of you are new to Xamarin. So I actually have a talk with Miguel later today at 2 o'clock in Hall 1B, I believe. So we're really going to dive really into how you were creating applications with Xamarin. But when you install 2013 or 2015 or 2012, whatever you want, when you install Xamarin, you get the Xamarin plugin for Visual Studio. And if you install 2015, if you go to Options, when you're installing, there'll be a Xamarin checkbox there for cross-platform development. But when you actually go and get started, and you say, I want to add, let's say, a new project here, you'll have brand new iOS and Android project templates. So here we can see different blank, aware application, WebView, OpenGL, different binding libraries. Then we have iOS and Android here as well. So if I click on iPhone, for instance, here, different iPhone applications, just like any other project template you would imagine. Now, we design these user interfaces directly inside of Visual Studio. Now, for Android, everything is fine. It's built right in, the SDK, everything's good to go right inside of the PC. So I'm basically here on my PC. For the iOS bits, you do have to have a Mac just because of how the licensing works there. So I'm connected here to my Mac on a little program called the Build Host. It does a remote compilation, which is pretty amazing. So here, for instance, I have my iOS application. We see how I kind of structure this. I have an Android application, iOS, shared code, and then my Windows Store application as well. So it's just all the projects living together with your shared code. And then if I look at my project and my NuGet references, what I have installed, there's a bunch of great .NET libraries, such as JSON.NET, and obviously the things that we'll be talking about with Office 365 today. We have a full storyboard designer built right into Visual Studio. So here's the actual flow of the application that I built out. It's like a whole overarching theme to the application. So you can see when things are navigating back and forth, built right into Visual Studio. And the same thing is true for Android. So Android, it's a page by page, kind of like XAML. So here's my login screen, for instance, here with 5-minute meeting and a login button. And we have our own designer built in with a full toolbox that you would expect, all the widgets, and we have source and everything back and forth. So it's all Android XML in this bit here. So that's kind of the core of how that is structured, and that's what 5-minute meeting is all about. Now we're going to talk more about the actual shared code and how we authenticate. Let's actually talk about how to get up and running with Office 365.
There you go. So what it looks like to building something like this that interacts with Office 365. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to understand how to integrate our app with the Office 365 APIs that we talked about, and then authenticating with Azure Active Directory. So the Azure AD is actually the one that is protecting all these resources from your app having access to. So you need a way to authenticate the user, consent for the requested resources, and once consented, you will have the token with which you can now go and discover the available services, because you could be in different regions and your servers could be in different data centers. You need to know where your Exchange server is. You need to know where your OneDrive servers is. So the discovery service here, what we are talking about, we'll see in a minute, will help you to discover those. And once you have that, you will get to know where I should actually talk to get the calendar events, or even understand how to put an event. So let's look at what options we get to integrate Office 365 services in your Visual Studio Xamarin application. So we have this awesome tool called Office 365 API Tools for Visual Studio that streamlines the process of registering your application with Azure AD, and also giving you a UI to actually select what resources you want, or you could say what capabilities you want for your app. So as you see in the screenshot, we have like calendar, files, sites, and even users and groups if you want to go access your gal. And once you select a resource, you have specific permissions for the resources. So as you can see here, calendar has kind of, they're not the same, but you can see the contacts has read your contacts and have full access to contacts. So what Visual Studio does here is it goes and registers an application for your app in Azure AD. And once it does that, it will also download all the NuGet packages that you required to interact with these services. Of course, you could go and interact with them through the REST standard, because everything is open, the metadata is available. We also built a powerful SDK based on the metadata what we have. So we actually generate these SDKs in probably 10 seconds, because we have now a tool that generates everything from OData v4 protocol. So what we have in the SDK is exactly the same as you see in the metadata. Question?
Do I have to do this for each company's Azure AD, or do I do this just for my tenant?
So the question is, should I have to do this for each company's tenant, or should I just do mine? So in the device application world, you're publishing it to the store. So you would do it in your company or your Azure AD portal. And what that will do is it will register a device application as a multi-tenant application. Meaning if somebody else downloads it from the store, logs in, it will put an entry in that user's Azure AD portal, and the admin can go and see it. If the admin thinks that this is a malicious attack, he can even go and revoke all the access to it. So there's a lot of good administration options available for that.
Yeah, the first time I thought when I was getting up and running, I said, Chox is going to be, this seems like it's a huge API. I'm integrated with AD8YL and Office 365 and Azure AD, all this stuff. To be honest, it's pretty streamlined. It's super streamlined. We'll take a look at this as well, actually.
So for authenticating, we need to make it really simple. We wanted something really simple, not go and tinker around, what is this protocol, what is that protocol? So luckily we have a library called Azure Active Directory Authentication Library. I think there's a slight bug. So ADAL.NET, which is Active Directory Authentication Library, that will help you authenticate with Azure AD resources, and kind of supports everything, right? You may have ADFS set up, or you may directly go to Office 365 portal. So all those things, the library supports all those mechanisms, and it makes it really easy to get authenticated and get the token. And then, of course, we have the API libraries, which are portable class libraries. So that's the reason why it is so simple and easy to get using in Xamarin application.
Good. So let's actually just take a look at that. So really quick, we'll switch over and actually see what happens when we actually want to get up and running here. So I'm here back in Visual Studio, hopefully. 6? Yep. I know it says HDMI, but it's not.
Yep.
All right, so here I'm in 2013. This obviously works in 2015 as well. So I have my different applications. And when you just right-click on iOS or Android, you can say Add. And then you'll see Connected Services down here. So there it is. And I'm going to click on that. It's going to go away, of course, with my Zoom tools. But we'll add a connected service. Now, I'm already connected here, but this will be a very similar experience. I won't finalize it. But we can say Register your app. And this will have you log into your account. So actually, let's go here to my Win30 or my Windows 8 one where I've already done it. So we'll add Connected Service. There we go. And I can sign in again. There we go. Let's sign in. Personal. Uh-oh, does it? Oh, it doesn't show it perfect. I like the password boxes that show everyone your password. Best time. That's the best thing to do for demos. Oh, geez.
So one of the things here is that this tool works only with Azure AD accounts. So James here was just being smart to try it out with a personal account.
Personal account does not work.
Exactly. So the Azure AD stuff, it is only for the work or school accounts, right, which is tied with the Office 365. It's not yet pulled down to Outlook.com. But we are merging all these authentication schemes, and very soon you would be able to actually have something that is common across all of our account systems.
There we go. So now I'm logged in, and we can see that similar dialog that we saw. So we have different calendar events, contacts events, mails. This is how you're actually integrating the permissions and putting into the backend. So if I want to add access to my files, I click on permissions. Do I want to read and write, and I can apply these here. When I click OK, it'll add all the DLLs and NuGets for me as well. So we already saw those earlier, but we can see the long list of packages that we have here. Got to have all the NuGets and all the packages. What we can see up top here is here's all of the Azure ADAL and Office 365 APIs. Now what that did is really interesting, is if I jump back over into my Azure portal, and I go down to my Active Directory, we can see my actual company here, and we can see our application. So I can dive in. This is my specific Azure AD, and I can click on Applications. And here's 5-minute meeting here. It's a native client application. And here's my dashboard where I can configure different things. But what it's done is it gives me my client ID, my redirect URLs automatically. I can upload my photo here. And then you can additionally manage the permissions from here. So when you sign in, it'll sync back and forth. So if you prefer to do it in the back end or revoke permissions or add permissions later, you can add them from here as well. So you don't have to actually do them inside of VS.
Exactly.
Kind of hides all of that for you.
And you can actually don't use the tool, come back here, do it yourself, and then add the NuGet packages through NuGet Package Manager. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. The tool is just going to help you, quickly get started and build apps.
And we'll see now how we have Azure AD up and running, but we want to integrate, and we want to integrate this into the Active Directory authentication library, and all this information is extremely important. So let's actually figure out, Office 365, easy to connect, but now we got to authenticate. So we're step 2 already. We're getting there. So Azure AD, I thought this was going to be pretty complicated, but it actually wasn't, surprisingly. This is the flow in my mind, how I comprehended over the last few months of figuring out Azure AD, how it's simplified with V3. So the idea is you need this thing called an auth context. This is where you start. So this is my authorization context. It's a class that we use. And what it's going to be using is our authority. So this is our tenant authority. You can almost think of it as an ID or a grouping for either my company or my identity. What do I belong to right now? Am I in the Visual Studio team at Xamarin? Am I in the Xamarin Studio team? Am I in the evangelism group? It's where I belong currently. And we always kind of start off with common. So we'll see here the string is actually formatted. So if you know your tenant ID, you can use your tenant ID. But if you want your users to log in for the very first time, it's going to be common, and we'll see that in the code.
And I think that's a common flow, right? When you publish your app to the store, you do not know which tenant or which user from which tenant is trying to log in. So Azure AD has this common endpoint where it could send everybody to log in. And once you logged in,
then you're going to acquire a token. So you're going to ask with this authority of common to acquire a token. And it uses a bunch of different things that we have. So the different resource ID and client ID is what we actually have in our Azure AD backend and that return URI. So it's going to use all this information. And then we have these authorization parameters, and we'll talk about those in a second. So when I acquire the token, I say Azure AD acquire token, It then prompts the user, based on the platform that I'm on, to automatically log in if I'm on iOS or Android or Windows, based on the different platform. When the user logs in, I get a result back, and that result has some information, such as my tenant ID and my access token. Now, once I have this access token, it's Azure AD, so I can do anything I want with it, which means that then I can take it to Office 365. And it's actually really simple code. If we look here, here's the authentication context that I'm creating with my authority. That's what it is down here. It's actually just login.microsoft.online. That's it with my tenant ID. Here, I'm going to check to see if my current tenant ID is common. If so, acquire that token async, so it'll prompt the user. Else, you can do it silently, because it'll automatically handle like the refreshing for you as well. And then when that returns all async await, I get my ID back and my access token, and I'm good to go. Now, of course, you may be wondering, though, what's this stuff? So we can see there's platform parameters and the settings thing, which doesn't really make sense. It's actually not part of Azure AD at all. But we'll talk about what's specific here and how we implement things in a cross-platform way. We'll first talk about platform parameters. So iPlatform parameters is how Azure AD handles login across iOS, Android, Windows, or any other platform that it goes on. It enables Azure AD authentication library to do specific things, such as prompt the user in a way. So there's an interface here that you have to create, but Azure AD has specific implementations for each platform. You just need to tell them about it. So this is my shared logic. So in my shared code is I have this thing called the platform params that I'm going to set up. In iOS, on our main page, it's pretty simple. I create an authentication helper class as part of my shared code, and I say platform parameters. That's it. In Android, it's a little bit trickier. There's a line of code, same line of code, and then it'll launch a separate activity, so it's a separate page, and when it comes back, Azure AD needs to be notified.
So you're saying the logic to actually bring up the page where a user could sign in is all done by ADAL?
You don't have to handle any of that.
Across all platforms?
All platforms. It's very
Excellent.
simple. Just logs in, you're taken care of automatically. Now, the other thing was the settings thing. So how do we actually get the tenant ID? Where do I save that? If you're in the Windows world, you might be like, I'll put it in isolated storage or application data, and I'll read that back later. Well, in a cross-platform world, you don't have isolated storage or application data on iOS and Android. So what's really interesting how Xamarin works is that we have that shared C# backend, but we also have all this junk up here. That's why I like to call this junk. What is this junk? We say it's UI, but at the same time, it's a lot of other things, such as GPS, text-to-speech, settings, anything that's platform-specific, whether it's on iOS, Android, or Windows. So wouldn't it be great if I could, write less of this code and had a common API to access? So we have a concept of plugins for Xamarin and Windows. So this is taking all of that platform-specific implementation of GPS, accelerometers, taking photos, text-to-speech, push notifications, and giving you a single API to access from shared code. And this is how we do it for the settings. And there's a GitHub page of all the different plugins. These are created by some Xamarins, but also the community as well, all open source. So for instance, if you want to access settings, well, I want to store it on iOS and NS user defaults, shared preferences on Android, or isolated storage or application data. So how we do this is we have a tenant key and a tenant default. So this is where I'm going to store it personally in my settings. Then I have a simple getter and setter. I created this plugin, so I was a Windows Phone developer originally. This API might look familiar. Get value or default, and then add or update value. And that's it. That is all in my shared code. So whether I'm accessing it from shared code or from iOS or Android or Windows, it takes care of saving it specifically.
And I think this was something that we ran very quickly into because we wanted to save something, in our iPhone, Android, and Windows. And there was like, oh, how do I use this? Is there something really simple? And we had this settings plugin, and we were very quick to save everything into different devices storage.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and switch over, and let's just take a look and through the application flow here a little bit before we get into a little bit more. So here we're back in Visual Studio. So for instance, here inside my Android application, I have a login page, and this is the first page that gets seen. And this is going to look very, very familiar. What I do here is I set up my platform parameters, and then I have a login click. When I click on that, here I show the progress bar. and then I say get calendar client, so it's actually going and making a call. Say I want to go do something in Azure, so if I need to log in, go ahead and do that. And when it's all done, I'm going to navigate to my first page and finish up. And we can see here I just implement a little result here. But how I structured this down in my shared code is all in an MVVM type of way. So for each page, I have a view model. I have different models and different Office 365 helper classes and authentication helpers. So the authentication helper is where all the Azure AD things live. So here, for instance, here's that client ID, the return, and some different static variables that I need to use when I log into Azure AD.
So this is like, instead of your username and password, you're actually letting your application to be identified with Azure AD and also validated, right? So the client ID identifies the application, and the return URI kind of helps Azure AD to validate whether the request is coming from the correct application. And then you can give the resources to which you want to get access to.
Exactly. So then back here, for instance, here's my get access token. It's going to look very similar. I put a little bit more try-catch logic inside of there. But actually what we can do here is, if I come over to my iOS application and start that up, let me say this is going to be my iPhone simulator. If I go ahead and launch this now on my iPhone 6s, we can see that I'll attempt to log in, and we'll get our auth result back here as well. So let's go ahead and put some breakpoints here. This will actually launch our emulator. Now, I've already logged in, so that flow is not going to come up, but we can actually take a look at that tenant ID as well. So I've logged in, and we have our authority there, which is that nice long URL. If we go into the tenant, let's actually go here. It should pop up. Let's see. Maybe. Let's see if it's common. We'll walk through the IntelliSense. All right, so it's not common. So it's going to go ahead and log in silently. And it's already done. It was that quick. To come back, and we can see that our tenant ID is this nice long GUID here. So I'm now storing and updating this tenant ID every single time. And that's the flow. It's actually really simple. That's all it does. So, and then if I access it again, we'll have some other breakpoints that I have set up for some demos later, apparently. Boom. We're good to go. So that was the flow. It's really simple. And that's the same code executing on iOS, Android, and Windows. So let's switch over. So now we're authenticated, and we're kind of good to go. But I don't know what I want to go to. So right now, we just have Azure AD, and we've set all those endpoints. So I say I have the possibility to go into calendars or contacts. But what happens when I want to actually access the events, and I want to actually enter something? How do I do that?
Good question. So we make it easier by providing a service called Discovery Service. Just like you have files, calendar, mail, there is a service called Discovery Service. Well, as the name suggests, it's going to help you discover the different endpoints and different capabilities your app has. So for example, in our instance, we want to get access to calendar. So I can ask Discovery Service to say, hey, give me the information about this calendar capability. So that's going to return you the resource ID of where the Azure AD knows what the calendar service is, and the endpoint URI through which now you can construct your URL or pass into the SDK client respectively. So what it actually does is that as you would request access to any Office 365 API service, the first thing you need to do is create the discovery client, right? Because you want to discover that. So you create a discovery client, and then you'll authenticate with Azure AD and get the access token for Discovery Service. So the Discovery Service is a constant URI. It won't change. So we have put that as apioffice.com/discovery. So using that resource ID, you authenticate and get the access token. Once you have the access token, you can use the Discovery Service to discover the capability that you're looking for, right? So you could say, give me the capability calendar, or you could say, discover all the resources that my app has access to. So depending on that, it could return a collection, or it could just return one, and then that is a discovery result. And the discovery result will have that specific endpoint for that user
so
and the resource.
If I want to go to contacts, that's the specific endpoint for contacts.
Exactly.
So then I can then use that later on to do stuff with.
Exactly. So because if you want to access contacts, you need to get the access token for contacts. You can't use the calendar access token resource to go and access contacts. So you need to be aware of that. Now, what do you do after that? Well, you basically now go create your client, right? So Exchange has the calendar, mail, calendar, and inbox messages. So you create the Outlook client, and for files, today it's in SharePoint client. So you create the SharePoint client. These are all available in the SDKs, and it gets added automatically if you're using the Office 365 API tools. And once you know that, once you have the discovery result, you know the resource for the calendar, right? So you can say to Azure AD now, it's like, hey, get me the access token for calendar. Now Azure AD is going to go back and look at, do I know you? Do I know the app? Oh yeah, you already signed in. You already have validated your app. So it will silently go request the access token for that particular service. So that's how it kind of works. And then you can access the APIs. How does it look in the...
Totally have API access now.
We totally have API
40
access.
minutes in, we totally did it, guys.
Yep.
We
So-
have API access.
Hang on, we still
almost.
need to show. I mean,
Gotta
there's
show
a
the
lot of
code.
talking going on here. Is
Yeah.
the code really simple?
Yes.
Well, luckily it is, right? That's why we have .NET and all the C# link coming in. So accessing the discovery service is as easy as creating a discovery client, right? As any C# object and method. So you just go create discovery client, new discovery client, and it accepts a function getter, which actually will get executed when the API or the SDK is going to access the service. So all it needs is give me the access token. So here we are using the same shared code that we just saw a moment before in the demo, get access token method, to go and fetch the access token for discovery service. And you can see we have the resource ID for that. Well, what do we do next, right? So you then create the discovery service. Sorry, you create then the appropriate services client. So in this case, we want to create Outlook client. So in the Outlook client, I'm just here trying to discover the capability using the discovery service first. So in our case, it'll be calendar. So once we get that result, I'm creating the Outlook client with a parameter of service endpoint URI, because the Outlook client needs to know where your Exchange server is. And we have the same function getter again here, which is going to say, how do I know where to go and fetch the access token if I require it, right? So it again uses the same shared code method. And remember, ADAL code has the smartness to understand whether it needs the user to be authenticated or you don't need to, because I already have a cache where I can go look for this user already.
Yeah, so if you log your user out and you set that tenant ID back to common, the next time something goes to access it, it's automatically handled for you. So you don't have to worry about, do I need to prompt my user right now again? Is my refresh token gone? Like Azure AD just handles it for you automatically. Yep. So what's really nice about creating that nice little login method and passing in a URL, if I'm going to any endpoint, just handled in 2 lines of code with a little async await magic.
Exactly.
Yep.
And this is the pattern across the Office SDKs you will see, is that for Outlook client or SharePoint client, you'll have an endpoint URI, which is the first parameter you pass, and a function getter to go get the access token. So we've seen a lot about the service, but actually how do I know where to go and access this if I don't want to use the SDKs, right? Because SDKs simplify those. So let's quickly skim through the different services we have. So the Azure AD, the directory service, you can go graph.windows.net/contoso.com, users to go and get all your users, groups to go and get manipulate all your group in Azure AD. And there's also the management piece where you can actually use these APIs to go create applications and do all those stuff in Azure AD. You can also get some extended profile. So you have the SharePoint user profile. We have the Exchange contacts picture. So you can go get those through the different endpoints too. We have mail, calendar, contacts, and conversations. The conversations belongs to the groups. So if you are in US data centers, you'll probably hit outlook.office365.com and /API/v1 me messages is kind of where you go and get the messages, events, and contacts. And there's also some beta endpoints that we have published for the build. So you can go and look at the notification hub. Like if you want to get email notifications when you receive an email or something going on in the groups, we have that in beta. For files, similar thing. You go today to your personal user files. If you know the actual URL and the default stuff is, whatever your tenant -my.sharepoint.com/personal/username. If you use a discovery service, you don't have to worry about this. And that's the power of discovery service you can see right there. So I have put some examples in the slide deck as well as some related sessions. Feel free to download the slide and go and watch the videos. I would highly recommend watching it. There's some deep dive sessions. There's also new OneDrive beta APIs, which kind of merging the consumer and the business version. I highly recommend it.
Now, Chalks, like, if you go back a slide a second here. Now, this is straight just REST calls. We're very familiar with it. OData calls back and forth. But the real power that I love about the Office 365 APIs is that I shouldn't have to worry about this, usually. We're going to take a look here at mostly how to finesse this up. Because really, I don't want to make a REST call, go do this, parse it, do everything for me. I want a library to handle that. So for instance, if I want to get contacts, I should have a contact structure already created for me. And for instance, when you bring in the Office 360 APIs, I have an entire contact class for reading, writing, updating, managing, and deleting contacts. The same is true for events or anything else that I do in Office 365. So if I want to get contacts, for instance, I write just a few lines of code, all linkable. I say, let me get my client, so my Outlook client that I have. I'm going to say client.me.contacts there on my link query, order it, select the first 100, execute that asynchronous, and I just get the first current page back. Obviously, I'd want to add paging to this, for demo slides. That's 3 lines of code, if you were to put that link query in one line. 3 lines of code to get all my contacts back. After I've been authenticated, have my discovery client, that's it.
Yep. And the same thing for SharePoint client if you want to go get files, right? It'll be like where files result from f in client.me.files,
Yep.
right? And it's exactly just the properties, everything you could just align with the file object.
But let's actually just see it all in action. So let's switch back over here. So I'm going to show you how I've structured this class here. So I still have the iOS application up and running. Now, we talked here that we have our models and our view models. So again, this is all 100% shared code. This is 70% of our application. The rest is just UI that I've integrated here. So inside of here, for instance, I have this thing called, everyone's familiar with MVVM? It's like MVC, more Vs, more Ms. There you go. Ooh. So at the core of that is an iNotify property change. Now, I came from a lovely world of WinForms, and then moved to WPF, which was much more lovely, and loved data binding. I fell in love with XAML, fell in love with data binding. And if you saw earlier on Android, we got this Android XML. It's exactly like XAML, but without data binding. Perfect, so close. But still, we can use, so close. We can still use the same processes, though, to structure our code. MVVM is a great architecture pattern. I love it. At the core of that is iNotify property change. So for instance, here I have a contacts view model. And the contacts, oh wait, where's my contacts view model? There it is. And we see we have observable collections of eye contact. I have a grouping structure, so I can actually group things by different names. And of course, at the core of anything I do in MVVM is an isBusy. So if I want to actually process something, and I go isBusy, and I'm good to go. So for instance, if I want to say get contacts, I'll check to see if I'm busy, and if something's currently going on, don't do anything. That's just an I command that I could bind to as well. And then I clear out my contacts. I ask this contacts API get contacts, and this is something we'll take a look at here. But then I just iterate through, and I add things to my contacts, and then I sort. So if I go to my sort, there I am. This time I'm sorting, so I'm using another link statement to actually group everything together. That's beautiful. And then I set my contacts grouped here. And if we go into there, we can see that I have my contacts grouped, and I can raise property notifications and subscribe to those. So if I want to call this method, let's first see what iOS is about to do. So if I come into my contacts view model, so this is now we're in the code behind for iOS. And there's a bit of setup code here. I'm adding a little spinner here. I have this little refresh control. And what we can see what I'm doing is I say, if I'm busy right now, don't do anything. Else, let me go get the contacts and refresh my table list of data. So this isBusy, though, actually down here, we'll drop down some of these. I actually subscribe to property change notifications. So it's my own light MVVM framework that I have, not MVVM Lite, which is compatible with Xamarin. But this is kind of the core of it here. I say, if the isBusy property changes, let me begin refreshing, start the spinning animations, and I'm good to go. So we can actually create our own little MVVM structure here as well. But we can add breakpoints into here, and we can step through this flow. Let's go back to iOS, and we'll simply pull the refresh. And we get our first breakpoint here. inside of Visual Studio. And let's kind of dive through here. We'll go to definition. And here's this get contacts. We'll add a breakpoint here. We'll go into this contacts API. And we can take a look and see what this is doing. So it has a get contacts client, and then it's iterating through. So this is the code that we saw. So let's actually just add breakpoints along the way and see what's happening. There we go. We get this, kind of little helper classes that I've created. And then this is the core of our application. So there's this, and we'll return this contact client. So we'll add some breakpoints here. So we'll continue on. So now we're going to say, let me get my contacts. Let me go add a breakpoint after. I'm going to continue on again. It says get contacts. So this is all in the shared code. 100% now. I'm entered shared code. I want to get my contacts back and return it, or my client. I said, let me get my access token. So now we're getting access tokens again. Got my auth result. So there we go. It's got my contacts client. It's got the client me, which I could go ahead and dive down and see here's me. And here's all the different things. So calendar, contacts, events. Now these will be filled in based on what I'm passing in. So I'm only creating and I'm getting access to my contacts here. So for instance, I'll only have something inside of my contacts, and I could dive down, and it has different things. But here's my list of contacts that I have, and it's a contact collection.
And actually, what you did here was you used the discovery service to understand where your Exchange server is.
Yes.
You created a discovery client.
Yeah, so if we, again, look at this get contacts client, it says, let me get a get Outlook client for contacts. So here I can see, do I want to get access to mail, calendar? It's my own private helper, so I don't have to write this code over and over. So I say, get Outlook client, let me get my mail client. And that's not really getting the mail client per se. It's saying, let me get my Outlook client with permissions to these. So here, when I actually go get my contacts, it comes down here, uses discovery service to discover that capability and return that collection to me. So again, if I come back here, here's my current page results, and we can see I have 31 different contacts with all the different information that's inside of here. Of course, it's going to fade in and out. That's good. And then now we can pass that back to our view model. So again, we're still 100% in shared code. And then I can do anything I want. I can sort my view models, and at the very end, we'll say I'm done. And now back up top, there I am with my new refreshed list. So for instance, here, if I actually go up and I'll say, well, yeah, that's good. So now it's the same thing over here on Android. If I ran the same code, we'd hit the same exact breakpoints debugging in and out of code as well, which is really powerful. So of course, that's the nice, beautiful API that we have to work with, contacts get. If we look at my contacts API, it's really nice. Here's update async, delete async. I pass in a contact. And then you see some stuff. Ugh, that looks gross.
How many have used REST APIs? Do you guys love using it? Do you guys use HTTP client and system.net.http?
Sometimes you have to.
Sometimes you have to.
Sometimes you have to. I'm not going to lie. So this is a nice, beautiful API. However, there's some intricacies right now with the OData library, and as it's being upgraded. So right now, there's kind of a mixture of Office 365 and then accessing with the clients, but then accessing things with just actual RESTful service calls.
Sometimes
And
you have
okay.
to.
It's not that bad. For 1 or 2 calls, I'm OK with it. The nice thing is that it's just JSON. I use my good friend JSON.net to see serialize things back and forth. So if I actually go into my calendar API, we actually have a add calendar event. I pass in the calendar event. I'm deserializing and serializing things back and forth. So we can actually take a look here. So if I actually
And actually, you're using the same authentication
now,
shared code.
Correct. The nice thing here is that I'm not authenticating in a different way. So Azure AD stuff, it's actually making that insert, that post to the server. So I guess I'll make another calendar event with you. You want to meet after this? Sounds
Sure.
good? Let's do 10 o'clock. There we go. Schedule up. So we'll get our access token. So we're accessing, getting our access token back and forth a few times. There we go. So now we can see I have my calendar event that I've created, and it has different time zones, a body, HTML 10-minute meeting for the status report.
And that's just a model,
Yeah.
right?
This is just a model that I created.
Data model.
You can use the same model that the libraries are giving you. And we can see then I just serialize it. It gives me some JSON back, and I post that up to the server. So here's my little send request async inside of here. It does a bunch of stuff. The good thing is I wrote all this code. You don't have to. Problem solved.
And one important thing that we do here is we actually inject the access token in the bearer header.
In the bearer header, yeah.
Whenever you make a call, because you're using REST, you need to, when you contact the office, you need to send that access token when you do that. So that's something that we do in the send request async.
But this is very common code, and that's what I love about Xamarin, is if I need to go and access HTTP, I bring an HTTP client, I make my RESTful service call, I'm done. And that's, to me, as a developer, how I want to live. I don't want to have to worry about what's going on. And we see get access token, it loves to get access tokens back and forth. And then we can get the new serialized calendar event. We just heard my machine, boom, 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 and we're good to go. So,
Oh, there it is.
Yep.
It works.
Still working.
Still working.
Whew, doing it live. So that's really great. But now, let's say I wanted to bring this over in my last few minutes to Windows Store. So we look at Android and iOS a lot, but I created a Windows Store application really quick. This actually I did in the speaker room in about 3 minutes or so, after I figured out how to make a list view again. So there we go. So this is my beautiful user interface that we'll see, but I've data bound everything up because I'm in an MVVM type of way. So here what we can see is that I'm just simply data binding my contacts, item source. I have a display name down here for a text. And I'm doing some magic down here to make some circle images that you can look at that code. But in the code behind, this is quite beautiful. I create that contacts view model. I create new platform parameters. And I just say get contacts async. Everything's all data bound.
That's like 3 lines of code, maybe 4.
Wrote my XAML, wrote my lines of code, and I'm done.
Wow. So we are using the 70% shared code fully in action.
Fully in action. And I mean, in this instance here, if I go here and go to back any CPU, just one screen just to kind of really show it off. I've already, I think, logged here in on this machine. But this will actually run the Windows Store application.
Now, if you folks want to look at how to build Windows 10 with kind of the same familiar shared code and everything, I'm doing my session at 2 o'clock. So I'll be going through the new Windows 10 controls and how we can build it. There's some nitty-gritties here and there, but I'll be talking a lot on Windows 10.
Yeah, let me go ahead and disable all breakpoints, because that'll be super annoying. There we go. There we go. And there's all my contacts.
Yep.
So again, I didn't have to do any work. I just created a new user interface. Again, things would be true if you wanted to bring this over to UAP or Windows Phone as well. I've already authenticated here as well, which is pretty awesome. Cool. So of course, we talked about, well, this is the current status. This is my beautiful animation, smiley face. We're good. So if you're looking at the different APIs, get, delete seem to work fantastic across the board. Still some issues with post, patch, and update. So I put little lightning bolts, my amazing artwork of insert clip art. So use REST on those right now. Now, of course, as we work with the team, hopefully you won't have to in the future.
And this is just for the SDK, not the service. So,
Yeah, only the SDK. Now, of course, we're going to talk a lot about Xamarin Platform, how we integrated with Office 365 today. Later on today, again at 2 p.m., I'll be talking a lot more about Xamarin. So Xamarin Platform is designing and integrating iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows applications together. We have an entire testing solution for your iOS and Android applications to create automated UI scripts with Xamarin Test Cloud, and also an analytics as well. So if you want to gather rich data, Xamarin Insights that lets you get real crash reporting, managed and native for any of your iOS, Android, Windows Desktop, WinPhone, Windows Store, anything you want. And of course, we have Xamarin University to learn all of that. If you want to get started with Xamarin today, of course, you would just head to Xamarin.com. Start a free 30-day trial. Anything you can do here, you're up and running in any version of Visual Studio 2010 and up. But definitely 2012 better. You get async awake. Come on.
Yeah. And to tag along to the getting the Office 365 access, your developer subscription, you can actually go down to the Office 365 booth, complete the mini lab, and you can get familiar with all the APIs, as well as you can get a free 3-year developer subscription. I think it is for 3 years.
That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. And you get some, we have awesome training. If you go to dev.office.com, you get to see all the training resources we have. There are a lot of MVPs put effort on actually building the labs for you folks. And we have a lot of free code in github.com as well.
Yeah.
Yep. So, collect your stickers in the mini lab. You'll get a free T-shirt. We have some express talks going on. And also, don't forget to evaluate us and give us your awesome ratings so we can come back next year and do some awesome sessions like this.
Everything that you saw here is all 100% up on my GitHub, so you can pull down this application. You can just run it. I just left all my access tokens and everything in there. Why not? So you can grab all this source code. You can ask me questions, ask issues, of course. Ask any of us any questions at any time. I'm here to help with anything when it comes Xamarin related or integrating any of these amazing SDKs as well. And of course, do that. And thank you so much.
Thank you.